enough time. So, welcome to today's Sifted Talks in partnership with Box. Today, we're going to be talking about how startups are using AI to scale because the technology is transforming workflows across every industry, none more so than the startup sector, where there's ever increasing pressure, always pressure to do more with less. So, over the next hour or so, we're going to be discussing practical strategies for leveraging AI to solve real pain points with our panel of founders, CEOs, and investors and engineers. And we're going to be finding out where AI is delivering real value and what common pitfalls founders should avoid, how startups can integrate AI responsibly and ensure long-term growth against short-term hype. Now, to do all that, I am joined by Rhiannon White, the CEO at period tracking app Clue, Ben Blume, partner at investor Atomico, and Omar Davison, solutions engineer at Box. Unfortunately, Varun Banot, co-founder and CEO at Magic AI, is ill today, so won't be joining us, but we'll struggle on without him. We're going to be taking audience questions throughout, which you can submit using the Q&A function. These can be upvoted, and we're going to discuss the most popular. And I want to start by asking our panelists to give us a brief breakdown of the areas in their businesses they're rolling out AI in, what they're building, and when they began to ramp up use of the technology. Rhiannon, I'm going to come to you first. How are you implementing AI at Clue?
Thank you, Kai, and thank you everyone who's made the time to come along today. It's really lovely to be here and have an opportunity to talk about this very exciting space. So as Kai mentioned, I'm Rhiannon, I'm the CEO at Clue. We are a menstrual and cycle tracking app used by over 10 million monthly active users worldwide. And we've been on a bit of an exciting journey over the last, I think probably 12 months really for us, where we've been rolling out AI capabilities across the team more broadly. Where do we use it right now? So we use it in support, which I think is one of the first and earliest use cases where people go. We use it in localization. Our app is translated into 20 languages, and actually it's a very text-heavy app because we're a very science-backed product, so we have an enormous amount of high-quality scientific content that we want women to be able to read in their own language. We use it in engineering, we use it in marketing, and we've also had some success with using it in a couple of other back office functions. So it's been a pretty exciting journey for us in terms of I guess the productivity gains have been really substantive, very impressive, but we've also had some watch outs and things that we've learned along the way.
Cool, thanks, Rhiannon. And are these customer facing, or are these mostly internal at the moment?
Bit of both. So, for example, we're now actually using it for all of our localization. So we have everything is translated first using the AI, and then we do run a human eye over it, particularly for the medical and scientific language, where it's really important that that's right. And in fact, it's really important that's right as part of our product range. So much around women's reproductive health, people don't even use the right terms. So we need to be using the right language. So that's all user facing. And a lot of it is also then internal, and actually all the support stuff is obviously user facing, but also some of the big gains we've been seeing around internal processes.
Well, great. Omar, why don't you tell us how, I guess, one, Box are implementing AI, but also what you're seeing in the companies that you work with. What are the broad trends you're experiencing right now?
Sure. By way of introduction, I'm Omar Davison. I'm one of the solution engineers here at Box. Think of it as a sort of a technical evangelist where I work with a number of other organizations, be it startups or larger, and how we can help implement some of the solutions like Box in this world. Yeah, it's an interesting one because about 2 years ago, with the advent of Gen AI and large language models, both our CEO and our CTO, almost at the same time, just looked at each other and went, yes, and just did this hard pivot towards the notion of AI and how it could help with content and with organizations around the world. So where we used to think of ourselves as sort of a cloud content management system, we've now pivoted over to something called an intelligent content management system. And really, our CEO is really putting the emphasis on AI first in everything that we do. So the way we've implemented it and sort of rolled it out and looked at it, similar to what Rhiannon's talking about when it comes to customer-facing stuff, definitely the support agents and creating the localizations of articles and things, because our support products are also used around the world. But then internally, we've started introducing it to the technology that we offer to our customers. And I'd say the biggest thing is that we internally are now sort of the playground for our product team. They've done a really great job of essentially whenever a new model comes out in the market, whether it's Google or Amazon or OpenAI, internally we have access to it within about 6 to 12 hours. And now we can start playing around with it and testing it and seeing all the capabilities and doing that. And from that then breeds onto, oh, this was really helpful. This is a use case that we could use. And if it's useful for our teams, like our legal, our sales, our marketing, no doubt it's something that can also then be offered to our clients. And so we then look at how do we incorporate that and share that wealth of knowledge to our customers as well.
Yeah, okay. Ben, does that chime with what you're seeing in the market? Like, what are you seeing when startups come and they pitch to you? You've got portfolio companies. Like, what are you seeing them use AI for right now?
Yeah, of course. And just by, again, quick way of introduction, I'm mainly working with very high growth, very ambitious technology companies, sort of at the early stages of their journey. So generally when they're somewhere between maybe 10 and 500 people in the teams. I think we're seeing everything and anything right now. I think that the range of innovation and ambition for what people are looking at doing with AI is kind of fantastic, both very much for kind of internal operations and growing their own businesses, but also for what their kind of products are delivering to their customers. Maybe to touch on a couple of major themes we've been looking at or seeing particularly in the last months or quarters. I think one is obviously internally the function that's most far ahead in the adoption of these tools, unsurprisingly, is the engineering function. And so, we're seeing more and more productivity got out of internal engineering teams within the startups we work with, based on using Cursor and Windsurf and a range of other tools to just accelerate development. And I think, you're seeing companies either do, ship more with the same number of people or, able to get efficiencies in their team and at the same time. I think another interesting trend within the kind of AI and coding space is these kind of prompt to application, or what's been kind of colloquially called vibe coding platforms, which have seen some, monster, extremely rapid growth over the past months. I think what's really interesting is it's obviously captured a piece of the market and, an imagination of the kind of prosumer user who wanted to be able to build their own applications, wanted to be able to kind of prototype stuff, hadn't, previously been able to do so through lack of ability to kind of go deep on the code. And so it's been amazing to see that piece of the market unlocked. I think it's, this space overall is furthest ahead because, apart from writing kind of general text, it's what these models are best at. There was just such rich training data to start with on code, publicly available. These models just got very good at writing code very quickly. I think the second, I'm sure we'll come to this, is AI agents and AI agents for everything. But I think, super high level, I think first generation AI agents from 18 months ago were really the low-hanging fruit tasks. It's a lot of SDR tasks. It was customer support. I think now what we're seeing is the next generation or the next wave of agent companies tackling more complex and more, interesting and differentiated problems, things like legal, procurement, other similar areas.
Yeah, for sure. And we will definitely come on to AI agents. Anything when there's so much hype, it's always quite interesting to delve deeper behind the buzz. Rhiannon, when you've been building out these AI systems, you've been implementing it across engineering, marketing. How much of that have you done in-house? How much of that have you outsourced? And how did you make those decisions?
Yeah, so most of it is in-house in the sense of it's been driven by the teams internally, but using external tools or externally built products. And really, in terms of how we made this decision, actually, and I guess this is one area where Ben and I in the earlier pre-conversation slightly disagreed, but it's been driven by the team, right? So we've really said to, for example, our support team, for them to choose the tool that they feel is best going to work for them. Again, for the engineers, in terms of choose the right tool, the thing that's going to work for them. Same in localization. It's too early for us to know what is the best thing and where we're going to go. We want to see where the gains come from. There is one area that we're working on where we're working with a university around an experiment that we're running in terms of building something between the two of us that can work on our content. So that's, I guess, a joint, if that makes sense, both in and outsourced. But mostly it's been driven really internally and by the team.
And Ben mentioned like a number of different like coding platforms and that sort of thing. The term vibe coding is thrown around quite a lot right now, and it's an amusing one. It's one of those startup terms which sounds quite impressive. Are you vibe coding at Clear, Rhiannon?
No, and I'll tell you why, because we have over 10 million women's personal health data inside our database, right? So we don't, like, vibes is not good enough when it comes to taking and treating people's personal health data with the care and attention that it deserves. So no, shortly. We are experimenting with tons of stuff around that, but when it comes to actually working with the data and working with the product, which is, it's an entirely data-driven product, and that's what women come to us for, right? They want data out of what they put data in, they want data back. And the thing that's really important, and that I mentioned that watch-outs that we found, is that, you know, like, to be really frank, these models all have an enormous amount of bias built into them. And I'll give you two very concrete examples that have happened to us in the last 3 weeks. So 2 weeks ago, a colleague and I were preparing slides, and we were thinking, we're like, great, we have an illustration style in-house that we use. And of course we are, you know, 99% of our users are women. There's a small amount of men who use the product as well, because we have a partner function, but they're primarily women. So all of our illustrations, and when we're illustrating what we're doing, we use women. So we were really excited about the new image model from ChatGPT. Uploaded a bunch of our illustrations. We only have one designer. We're a small team, one who works on this. So rather than trying to make her churn through board slides, let her focus on user-facing work. We thought, great, we'll use this, upload it, ask them to generate a new image for us. Every time they would take the women out of the image and give us back images that had men in them, but not just were there men in them. When all the base content that we uploaded were women only, not only were the images coming back with men in them when there weren't any men in the base ones, they were coming back with the men in the leadership positions. So, you know, if it's like a work thing, the men would be standing and pointing and the women would be sitting and listening. So, like, that's just not cool in terms of what we're trying to do and what's going to happen in our, you know, in our environment. We are a 65% female-led company. Like, it's, you know, it just doesn't, it's the bias inherent in the system. We obviously worked with it and got to a point where it wasn't doing that, but the original results were really, really fascinating implicit bias. Another example that we have happening, that happened last week. So I mentioned this joint project that we're doing, and the privacy point is really important for us. So, for example, we're not going to share our data out into these public models at this point. And so we have we have hundreds and hundreds of articles that are written by doctors, clinicians, scientists around women's reproductive health. It's a severely understudied area. There's a really wealth of information there. And we know our users love this content, but we don't have a good search function, right? So we have all this content, but how do you find the thing that you want that's relevant to you? So rather than building a search function, we thought, great, we'll work with this partner, and we will come up with, you know, some kind of bot that will help us do that. And in the training of the now, this is not a public productized model, so obviously it would hopefully be better on the productized ones, although having to see what happened with those images, maybe not. The model didn't recognize the word menstruation, and it split it into men and menstruation. And so all of our content is now full of men and instead of menstruation. So, like, it's, and obviously it's like, it's a learning thing, we can change it, but that's just what I mean around, like, we have to constantly be watching out for this and being careful and thinking about it. We can't just vibe code or just like press a button and it'll be fine, man, because it really won't.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and there are totally different use cases for this. And yet, when you're handling healthcare data, it needs to be right all of the time. Whereas, you know, when you're, I don't know, doing some internal coding thing, it can be right 99% of the time, and that's okay. Omar, yeah, no, go ahead.
Have you seen any? I was talking to some some kind of healthcare researchers in another area this morning, and they were bringing up exactly the same problem. Like, they have, you know, sensitive patient data. And I was wondering or asking them about whether, because this technology is also very good at generating synthetic data sets, whether you've been able to use it to do that so that you can then, you know, in some kind of development environment, have really high quality, very accurately matched synthetic data, do your work on that, and then, you know, port that into your live environment once you've got this stuff working better. Has it been helpful on that, or not really yet?
That's an interesting thought. We haven't looked at that. And the thing that's interesting and where it's a fine line is, I mean, the models are actually really also good in terms of, I was speaking to someone at a major company that has a major model. I'm sure you can probably guess it as I go through the story recently. And as soon as they released recent imaging capabilities, people uploading their medical scans, right? And I speak to women every week, and a lot of them are telling me now that they are uploading their symptoms into ChatGPT, for example, and getting differential diagnoses that they then go and explore with their doctors. So it's not that people are necessarily uncomfortable about, but the point there is that they are the locus of control. They are sharing their data into the model, and they are making the choice about which data. It's not us sharing the data on their behalf. And I think this is the thing where we're just trying to tread so carefully, because our fundamental principle at Clue is always about choice and data sovereignty, and each woman should have choice over what happens to her data. So, the woman looking in Clue, taking the data out of it and putting it into a model, for her, great. Us doing it on her behalf without her permission, not great. So,
yeah, for sure. Omar.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing, Rhiannon, when we talk about the psychology of the removal of ownership, or the one or two lines away. If I'm willing to give all my data out to all the information to all the different parties, no problems at all. But hey, if I give it to you, it's sanctimonious, it's safe, it has to be safe. You have to do everything in your power to do it, keep it in absolutely the pristine condition without anyone else being able to access it. And I think that was one of the key things that we looked at when we first started exploring on the AI side of things, was that privacy notion, and how do we keep things safe? Because not only are we talking about our own, but because we have customers, we also have to deal with customer information. And I think one of the great things that we chose to do at the start was to really select, to be absolutely clear and fundamental that models don't train on data, kind of what Rhiannon's talking about here, because there's an inherent risk there, or the compliance or the privacy aspects of it all are there. So what we've chosen to do is create or house isolated models, so that if you're working with a model, it's a self-contained model that doesn't talk to the world, it doesn't remember any of the sessions, or that has memory of the conversations that you're having in play. And that way, it's only looking at the context that you're providing it in the moment for that moment. And that really allows you to have this sort of playground or sandbox world where you can just start querying and quizzing and asking things like, based on this information, what would the results be over here? And that gives you that safe play to really start understanding the capabilities of AI without running the risks of accidental or purposeful dissemination of the wrong information.
Yeah, for sure. What are the mistakes that you're seeing startups make, Omar, when they're looking to implement AI?
Oh, how long's a piece of string in this example? I think that idea of not really having the right principles or guidelines in place before sharing it with the world. And this always happens when you have something that is so consumer friendly, so free and open to the individual. And then we try, when it comes to the world first, and then we try to apply that to business worlds. Because as Rhiannon said, so many people use ChatGPT in their day-to-day lives. Like the new generation of people coming up through university and in schools, it's almost ingrained into their world, similar to how all the internet and mobile phones and all the other technologies we had. And then when we try to democratize that or bring that into the business context, we have to be a lot more safe, secure, considerate with what we try to do. So I think one of the pitfalls I've seen a lot of startups go into is just have that transition of being like, oh, you use this in your day-to-day life, let's start using it in our business world. And you really need to create the clear boundaries between them, saying you cannot do it for this purpose or that purpose. You cannot use this type of information or that type of information. We really want to guardrail it and protect it so that we're doing this right before we really start pushing it out for wider scale use.
How much time are Atomico's portfolio, or how much time are you talking to Atomico's portfolio companies about them educating, I suppose, employees on how and when to use AI tools?
It's a really critical topic for all companies, and I think maybe to come back and pick up on the point that Rhiannon mentioned before about kind of what's what's coming from ideas that the team have kind of generated themselves and tools they want to use, and then what gets mandated or becomes part of a core tool set. I think that the team should definitely be encouraged, and the people who are most interested in that in any team should be encouraged to figure out what they can use, obviously with the caveats that they shouldn't be putting live health data into a kind of new tool without proper frameworks. But people should be encouraged to see where they can get value. And then what I think needs to happen is that best practices where things have been shown to demonstrate really strong value to the organization need to be then sort of top down mandated for wider rollout. What you hear stories of, what I've heard stories of, is companies who say, well, we've got this tool that some of our engineers use, and the ones who really like it and adopt it really well, they're getting a 3x productivity increase. But there's some other guys on the other side, or some other people on the other side who are engineers who don't want to use it because it's not how they do things, and suddenly they don't have that increase. And well, we can't afford that because we know what the potential is. And so I think that we see the best companies, I think, go down that route, really encourage that kind of creativity from the team in terms of thinking through and trying things. And then starting to kind of mandate and roll out the best practice tools and make sure that, people aren't having to kind of pay for this stuff themselves on the side, or, make sure that then there's kind of clear organizational support for this. I think that works well. I had a nice idea this morning. I'm sure people remember the kind of 20% time that Google used to have of like go and do your own projects in 20% time. Someone today was talking about maybe like 20% time for experimenting with AI, and how that can impact the business, and actually spending one day a week just trying to figure out how you could maybe save 1 day a week in the future. So not seeing anyone like formally implement that yet, but I
actually, just to jump in there, totally agree. We had a really cool win in the team where we have the engineers have like chapter days, and recently they've been dedicating their chapter days to experimenting with AI and playing around.
Yes.
And in a recent one, maybe 5 weeks ago, one of our iOS engineers using various tools wrote some scripts that reduced the binary size 30% in 1 day, which is a huge user-facing benefit and is a huge benefit for everybody. And that's a great example. I totally agree. Like giving dedicated space where there's no pressure to deliver something. I mean, it was great that it worked out and we were able to ship it, but if it then it didn't matter. And I think that
like hackathons and things as well that seem to be
exactly.
nice.
It's sort of it's sort of also a bit less traditional hackathons. I've always disliked in terms of them people getting excited and they want to ship something that's half baked and you can't actually ship it because it's not production scale. But like giving them the space here, it's sort of feels more like the original idea, which is good.
How are you? How would you know if you're giving people too much time, I guess, to play around with AI? Like, at what point do you go, no, there has to be an end result here, or would that not be? I don't know, and like, is that not a possible scenario given the pace of change currently?
I think at some point it needs to yield something, right? And I think I was talking to a senior AI leader in a large corporate, and that was the question, was like, how are you measuring, how are you actually measuring the impact of these initiatives? Because you can, lots of things have kind of softer savings or kind of time savings in some form or another, but can you actually take metrics that are as granular as you would have used in other areas to look at performance and kind of apply them here? And I think that the answer, which I thought was sensible, was like, even if there are imperfect measures, try and pick some more analytical measures that you can look at that are some way a proxy for this, and kind of track those and see that there's value. I think in a that works particularly, I'm sure, in a big company. I'm sure there's interesting stuff going on internally at Box in terms of adoption of this. I think if you're a small company, it can all be a bit more anecdotal, and whoever's responsible for driving this stuff. And that's another interesting conversation, is actually who should be responsible for driving this in any size company. But whoever's responsible, should be having conversations with all the people using this stuff all the time. I mean, we have, even internally as an investment firm, we've got an internal kind of AI working group. We have, anyone who's on the group trying out a new tool has to kind of report back what they found, what value they've had, what any metrics or numbers they can put against it, and then that's how we decide what to roll out, what to make optional, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's really depends on what you're trying to get out of that experimentation and that play. If you're dedicating 20% time because you actually want to get a deliverable or an outcome that has a meaningful impact to the business, then absolutely there should certainly be some guardrails to it. But I am against limiting the ability to play, because I think, as Rhiannon talks about, I already talked about this notion of bias or this standardization or the generalization of how people could do it, whereas every person comes at this from a different angle. And maybe there's one person there that was just fiddling with something in the 5-minute spare. They were just trying to do something smarter for them. And they sort of this accidental knowledge explosion appears, and then they just go, hey, by the way, and the next time they talk to a colleague, don't worry about it. I just used this model and I did this thing over here and it saved me 10 minutes of time, but I didn't think it was that important. And then all of a sudden that starts rolling and putting a cascade through. So I like to the team here, if we're talking about structured, defined business goals, then yes, absolutely, let's put some guardrails, but also allow people the freedom and flexibility.
I think this point is really important, and the importance of play, because so much innovation genuinely comes from play and not having that pressure around. And when I think about the individual, for example, in our support team, classic canonical use case, we didn't mandate anything. We did have to go through a bunch of changes about 1.5 years ago, and so the support team is now only 2 people, but we've actually doubled the number of customers who they have to support in that time, but we've kept the headcount stable. And so they just started playing with it on their own out of necessity, but also, and we were like, great, tell us if you learn anything, no pressure around, what happens when you come back, when you think, like, it was genuinely play for them. And we were reviewing it together a month ago, and in that time, so the the number of paying subscribers has doubled, but the headcount has stayed exactly the same. Complaints have gone down and CSAT has gone up. So those are all hard measures, right? Of yes, this is working and this is great. But there was we didn't say you have to move those metrics. We said, okay, you have a situation, you want to play with this, go for it and have a bit of space. It is always a hard balance because you can't have everything being play. And obviously we're running a business that needs to pay its own way. But that little bit of space and that little bit of like taking the pressure off. And I think the thing that's exciting about the AI space is it's so early that, playing is really how all the good stuff is found. I guess that's the excitement around vibe coding, right? It's playing, it's letting you.
I think it's very empowering. I'm sure those people on your team, when you gave them the opportunity to do that, as well as enjoying playing with this stuff, I'm sure they felt very empowered to, take ideas that they might otherwise have had that they wouldn't have been able to implement and make them a reality, and then make their part of the business better.
Rhiannon, what hasn't worked out so far? Like what projects were you looking to integrate AI that just didn't end up making the cut?
Oh, that's actually quite hard to answer because most of them are still, the support stuff is going brilliantly, localization is going brilliantly. In the marketing space, where we've learned a little bit in the marketing. So for example, we're finding it incredibly helpful for things like ASO experiments, right? ASO is you just got to run hundreds of experiments. It's sort of algorithms talking to algorithms, like what are the words that the algorithms are going to listen to try and help you with the distribution. And so AI has really accelerated our experiment velocity there. And of course, there are things that can help with in terms of the creative creation, but the actual ideas and the generation we still need humans in terms of what is the creative that's going to spark with other humans, right? So we're sort of finding the bits where it works and where it helps and where it doesn't. I mean, those bias examples, obviously we work through, but those are great examples of where you go, okay, slow down, let's try that again. We can't have all our content saying men, not menstruation. So those are some of the areas where we see the edges of where we have to pay more attention.
Yeah, great. We've had a few audience questions come in. I'm going to save a couple of them till later on because I think they'll fit quite nicely towards the end of the discussion. But I want to talk about investment, startups getting investment from VCs and how they pitch this. And Darren Evans has a question. Ben, you're probably best placed to answer this, but it'd be great to get everyone's thoughts. As a startup who's kind of Darren says, prides itself on efficacy, privacy, and the various concerns outlined, they've held back from introducing AI, even when they've had some really innovative ideas about where to adopt it in their portfolio and have been paired with the Alan Turing Institute. Would that stance hold them back from an investment perspective? Should they be pitching it in a better way? Should they be, I guess, putting AI development more front and center, Ben? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think ultimately it really depends on what the business is doing. I think if you're not putting AI at the center of your product strategy, you need a good reason why not. And there can be very good reasons, right? One, the industry you're working in is not ready and it needs, it needs much simpler solutions before it needs that. Two, you're dealing with particularly sensitive information that for whatever reason, you can't find sensible ways to work with AI, or there can be other things. But for the most part, I think that the investor consensus is growing that AI is going to be pretty disruptive to most problems in most industries, in most areas over some time period. And so, the bar for taking a stance which says, we just don't use AI, it's not a relevant piece of our strategy, is a pretty high one. I think, in the question, Darren says that, they're a pre-seed company. I think, everybody recognizes that, products and AI products take time to build. And I think it's also perfectly fair to say, at the pre-seed stage, our MVP and the first thing we're trying isn't the AI part of our product, because that's kind of, great on top, but it's not the core of what we're building. And that, as part of raising pre-seed funding, we are going to build out and, explore and build out our AI kind of components of the product. I think that's a kind of perfectly fair narrative as well. But I think the bar of, we're doing something and we don't believe that AI is an important part of where this could go long term when you're building a technology and software company, I think is a very high one to prove at this point. And I'm not sure I can think of a ton of good examples of where that would be a really compelling narrative.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, I mean, one of the questions that brought up quite an interest discussed in the pre-panel talk was whether businesses prioritize investing in customer-facing AI to generate revenue, or should they prioritize internal AI to make employees more efficient? Startups are always trying to, balance out an incredibly finite amount of resources. Omar, like, what should people be thinking about when they're trying to work out where to channel resources into?
Yeah, this was the discussion that we had the other day, and I think it's an interesting one. And as I think a lot of the answers that we're going to give is it depends on the context and the safety and the security. As Rhiannon mentioned that time, and I'm going to steal your verbiage there, Rhiannon, in terms of like focusing on the internal productivity is a safer playground because you know that you're dealing with your company's data and you've got those guardrails in place. Whereas dealing with a customer's data where that might be revenue generating holds a higher value of risk. So do you have the right protocols, the right principles, the right procedures in place to protect all of that? So if you're going through an AI-driven product or service that you're providing, similar to Varun, who unfortunately isn't here today, he would probably say that the consumer-facing thing is the thing to focus on, and that's where we should go in. But if we're starting out and we're playing and we're trying things out, as we've been talking about today, I think the safer bet to bring it in is from the internal side of things and looking at the internal productivity and the internal gains that you could have, and then potentially pushing that out to customers. Because no doubt, internal productivity also then sort of cascades into revenue generation in some aspects as well. So you can get a twofold benefit from it.
That's similar to the conversations you're having, Ben.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're an early stage company, you've got to do both, right? If you're a startup builder, to the previous answer, you need to be working out what your AI product strategy is, as well as working out how you can best use these in your team. So I don't think you can really afford to pick one or the other. I think if you're a larger organization, then you need to be thoughtful about where you're using AI in your product. And I think, back to that earlier conversation of things that have gone wrong. People who very quickly reacted by sticking some kind of AI chat window on the side of their product and said, chat with our system, chat with your data, whatever it was. Some of those projects didn't really go that far because they didn't actually build a compelling user experience, and maybe they started to annoy people because what people were expecting from the best of those wasn't what yours delivered. And so I think when you're a larger company, you definitely need to be. I don't think there's any large company or larger company out there that is not looking for internal efficiency and productivity gains. That's kind of what being a scale company is about. So I think you've got to be looking internally, and that is the safe ground. And there's a growing body of proof that these tools can really deliver across many core functions. And then I think on the external side, if you've got an established product, it's not a core AI product, or even if it is, it's not kind of a core generative AI product, then I think it's about taking the time to figure out where you can actually build useful additional functionality, and get it out when it's good, quick enough that you can still remain competitive, because if you don't, your peers will, your competitors will. But on that side, not kind of rushing things out with the sort of low-hanging fruit that might actually detract from your customer's experience long term.
Yeah, for sure. Rhiannon, does that chime with the way that you're having conversations at Clue, I guess, among senior leadership, this strategy play? Is that broadly how you're thinking about it?
Yeah, it's pretty much exactly it. This is not going anywhere. So, it's better to have something that's of quality and trustworthy and that our users really value than to have, and it's better to take a few extra months than to have that tomorrow, for example, and have something tomorrow that breaks trust, because that would be definitively bad for us. And so, it's not like this is one moment and if we miss it, it's gone. It's just, I mean, as Ben was saying, this is and product strategy is about solving problems and solving problems in smart ways that haven't been solved before. And the thing that's so exciting about right now is it means that we can solve problems that perhaps we couldn't solve before. And that's one of the things that we're looking at, and what's so exciting for us about this new frontier is that when we get it right and get it in a right in a way that women trust and have confidence in, and have confidence that is built for them, and with them first in mind, it's going to unlock possibilities that we've all dreamed about in terms of women's health and women's health data, and what could be understood from that, and from these amazing longitudinal data sets that we've been building, but that haven't necessarily been able to be as much use made of until now. So it's an amazingly exciting opportunity, and it's not, we want to be fast and we want to be right. And so it's, it's okay to balance between those two.
How have you been communicating AI use to your customers, Rhiannon? Because presumably that's something that a lot of people have big concerns about.
Actually, that's a very good question, and it's a very good point. And actually, women in particular, there are initial pieces of work and surveys, population-based, looking at people's attitudes towards AI in products. And there is actually a very clear difference between women and men. And there are that some of this is connected to where, sadly, some of the early uses of image, we all know that often women have been the targets of some of the bad side of the image manipulation and things that can happen out there, right? So women have a lot more hesitancy and a lot less excited in terms of, okay, it's cool, but like, what does it do for me? So and in terms of where it is in the where, in terms of the translation, we don't say anything about how it's translated, because there are two series of checks. There's a check and balance there as well. In terms of the support side, we're very explicit about where they're being supported by an agent versus a human agent. And then we don't have anything live in the product that uses the user's data as yet. But when we get to that point, we'll be very clear about how we communicate and what's happening, because that transparency is the basis of trust. So we need to keep going with that approach, in our view.
Yeah, definitely. And whenever you're handling health data, like you need to show that you're being hesitant enough to properly consider, I guess, all the uses. But presumably there's on the other side of that, I guess when you're building coding platforms or, kind of anything around that doesn't involve, I don't know, maybe financial or healthcare data, there's a lot more freedom to just go, we're doing this, and maybe a lot more expectation to go, hey, look at us, we're implementing this and this and this. Omar, what are you seeing? Are you seeing people very keen to communicate this to customers?
Yeah, and I think Rhiannon's got it on point. Whenever it comes to customer facing or customer data, then the transparency is absolutely critical. There's no way that you can, similar to just sort of GDPR and other regulatory privacy notice and notifications or rules, you have to be very explicit about how you're using other people's information. But when it comes to the internal systems, I don't think people really make a big fuss about what tools they're using internally. People rarely come up and going, hey, I use email a lot, or I like to use Slack all the time. Unless you get these publications out there between the different technologies and the organizations to show how they're being innovative, we don't really talk about the tools that are being used internally. So I think there's a lot more acceptance, or maybe not acceptance, but unawareness, I guess would be the term, of what tools people are using internally, whether they be AI or not, in that respect. So have at it. If you have internal processes that you're playing around with AI, as long as you're not exposing that to customer data, I think it's fair game. But as Rhiannon says, as soon as you start touching customer data and people's information, that transparency needs to be absolutely critical and very clear and concise, so people know exactly what's going on.
Yeah, for sure. I want to move on to team dynamics, how you build a team when you're looking to roll out AI products and that sort of thing. First, I want to spend a couple of minutes on AI agents. Ben, what's an AI agent? How do we define an AI agent?
I think that the truth is that the term AI agent is getting more and more overused, overloaded, and means a lot of different things. I don't think there is a dictionary or formal definition of an AI agent at this point. The way I would think about it, it's it can be more or less complex, but it's effectively a workflow that's encapsulated in, a piece of software that then can be interacted with in a more human-like way. And so by more human-like way, I mean, you can send it some documents and it can do some stuff on them, rather than you having to kind of enter data into a form that it works on, or you can ask it to do something in natural language and it can go away and do that and come back with a result in natural language. And so I would probably give that as the best definition. Piece of software that kind of does one workflow, even if it's more complex, kind of wrapped up with sort of human-like input and output.
Rhiannon, are you using that definition internally? Are you using the term AI agent?
No. It's because Ben's right. It's a fuzzy term. We're not using any particular terms. We're just letting people talk about what they do. What are you doing? What's the impact they're having? What are you using to do that?
Makes sense. Omar, you're about to jump in.
Yeah, we're using a slightly different definition here when we work on ourselves and talk to customers. And ultimately, it's sort of Like, what's the function? What's the specific function that you're attempting to do with that AI in that particular moment, in that particular case? And our CTO often looks at it in sort of like a specialist. Consider an agent to be a specialist. You've hired a specialist because they're very good at a very potentially very narrow but very specific outcome or process or capability. And so whenever that particular function comes up, you call your specialist to say, hey, I need a very customized code, or I need a great user experience, or I need to organize an event, and you are my specialist, so I bring you in. And so in our world, we're looking at creating or the notion of an AI agent being those specialists and defining a very specific function or course for that, similar to what Ben said. I have a bunch of contracts. Let's use a specialist in contract analysis to understand the results of that. Or I have a coding agent. I'm going to use that one specifically to help create a good structured piece of code so that I can go through it. But you wouldn't expect them to sort of do other functions out there. I wouldn't expect a contract agent to then start coding. I would keep them in their lanes and sort of create this conveyor belt of agents that passed one function to the next to then develop these workflows that Ben's talking about and then get the full value of all the different tools that we have out there.
Yeah.
I think there's some really, there's some fascinating, slightly more abstract concepts that kind of come out of thinking about where agents take on tasks that were otherwise done by a full employee, and those tasks are very repetitive. So where one agent can do the work of a 20-person customer support team, this interesting question comes: if one person, if one agent can do and learn from 20 times the number of support cases, how much faster, how much better does it get? Because your employees only ever really had their local context, plus maybe you had a wrap-up session at the end of the week where you shared some of the most difficult cases or whatever else. But the agent has like the infinite context window of every conversation you're having with every support customer, and it kind of has them all in memory. And then that person never leaves, the agent never quits or leaves. So it's not like every so often you have to sort of start again or trying to do a knowledge transfer. There's something powerful about the idea that in any given function, you go from having very fragmented knowledge and having people kind of come and go to all knowledge ever being available to the single kind of thing that is making that decision. And then whether you call that, one agent or 50 of the same agent running in parallel with a shared memory, there's lots of different sort of more evocative ways of talking about this stuff. But I think that and then the efficiency gain that kind of comes from that, because you suddenly don't have to have 50 people doing those weekly wash-up sessions or moving cases between them, but it can all be done in one go. I think there's something that we're kind of yet to fully kind of realize or capture about the value creation, efficiency creation that comes from that.
This sort of leads to an amalgamation of a couple of points that have been that we've talked about so far, but kind of puts it into it. So one of them, Kai, you asked, was sort of what are the don'ts or the mistakes that people have people have experienced using AI, and this comes down to it in that the focus of what they're trying to do with AI is too broad. So to Ben's point, right, if you have an agent that's looking at support tickets, but it's only looking at support tickets, and those support tickets come in the same format and the same style and the same structure, then that data set is absolutely invaluable because it's got now all this wealth of accurate and relevant information for it to derive a result. Whereas what we see with a lot of organizations, particularly in startups, is they go, I have a mesh of stuff, and now I'm going to point AI to it, and I'm going to hope that it makes sense of all this information out there. And so, startups, we with small organizations, we don't have a lot of disconnected or siloed information. We tend to have things in clumps and buckets: my marketing, my sales, my data, my professional, all that sort of stuff. And then we point an AI tool to it. Let's take ChatGPT as an example, and then we start asking it questions of, tell me the right answer to this question. But all the information is irrelevant or inaccurate, and so we get wrong results. So this notion of your output is only as good as your input is really critical, because if you're using generalist AI for generalist functions, then you're going to get inaccurate results. But if you start narrowing down the focus and start using, and that's why the term agents has now started popping up, is these really specialized, really focused avenues. And that's where you'll see a lot of success and a lot of value from introducing the AI into what you're trying to do.
For sure. Let's talk a little bit about team. Rhiannon, how have you gone about building an AI or a team that can implement these solutions, have you had to make specific hires?
No, and I think, I just, Omar just like a total light bulb moment for me around, because the success that we've had has been because it's been driven by the teams focusing on their specific small niches, right? Their little small slices. It hasn't been me with my generalist view of the org looking and saying, it's been them driving up through very narrow specific use cases. And so it has been successful because they're in constrained sets or jobs or use cases, whatever term you want to use. So no, we haven't hired anyone specific. We are really focused on making sure that we are putting the support in place to upskill and support our existing team, because we share the belief. While I may disagree with Ben on mandating, I agree with them completely on that everyone's going to be using these tools. And so we want everyone to have time, money, the things that they need to learn and to make sure that they're comfortable using the tools. At some point, maybe we will need to hire in a specialist or two, but I really want our data team to be able to do this themselves, right? And to understand and have that knowledge for them as well as for us. They need that, just as engineering, just as every other team. So we're really focusing on supporting and upskilling our existing team first.
You have someone who internally is kind of not necessarily technically a leader, but it's just an advocate for this, who is the one who just sort of beats the drum for it in every conversation and makes sure it's front of mind for people.
Do you know, no, we are now moving to doing this now, right? So we're going to be doing a few series of events around this, but really what we've quite clearly decided as well as a management team is, because the success has come up from individual teams, we want the people in those teams to be the people sharing with the wider company. This is what I did, this is what I learned, this is what works. So it really has been very organic. Is that a good or a bad thing? I don't know, over the last 12 months. And now that we've got this emergent success, we want to then take it and be more deliberate in terms of, oh, hey, look, it's not scary. Your colleague who sits right next to you virtually has had this great success with XYZ. Look at what it's done for all of us and look at the impact it's had for our users. The really exciting thing has been having the metrics. So I mentioned those great support metrics. In the localization, we've also had, we've got more content localized for people, and we've had fewer complaints about inaccurate translations. So for our team is very motivated by seeing that they have an impact for end users and for women. And so whenever we can translate that through into, hey, look, you can see benefit for the user here, then the adoption is really easy and it goes like wildfire. But I think it's needed those individuals and those each teams to play and run those experiments and get those results and now take it out to the wider org.
Rhiannon, how have you been upskilling employees? Have you been sending people on like externally led courses?
So externally led courses, creating time for them to be able to experiment and play with things, because external courses are great, but really it's having a go, right? Hands-on, doing the work and learning what works and what doesn't work. So it's been a combination of the two.
Okay. Ben, what hires are you seeing are there specific jobs that have come onto the scene in the past few months that you're seeing, like lots of startups are beginning to hire these people?
Look, I think for people who are building more AI into their core products for the first time, of course, they need to build out AI teams. Again, with a level of skill depending on how kind of fundamental they are looking to, how much kind of fundamental research, or at least kind of how much familiarity with more kind of technical components of these models they're looking to kind of build into their products. But that's not changed. I think this kind of, I have seen more companies who are appointing somebody from the management team as kind of head AI advocate. Again, not to necessarily, this is not about kind of driving top-down adoption. This is more about just having, somebody who's senior, who is the kind of the champion of internal AI initiatives and who is creating those forums where people can share their ideas, is creating, is publicly celebrating those wins. And so those things feel like they have kind of, top level buy-in, and that, that creativity and that individual initiative feels like it has top level buy-in. And so I'm seeing sort of management leaders, and it's not always the CTO or someone technical, kind of nominated as, AI evangelists within companies to help drive that adoption. Yeah.
What's
I'm
going
not sure, I think the terms like prompt engineer and agent manager, whatever, I think are probably not real, not real jobs if they were things that maybe
prompt engineers say 2023. Omar, how's the team structure changed in the past couple of years since your founders had that light bulb moment? Have there been specific new hires brought in?
My understanding is yes, and to Ben's point when he says there's often an evangelist in the business, our CTO is that guy. Ben Kuss is an absolute fanatic when it comes to the AI stuff. He jumped on it with both hands, both feet, and everything else in between to be able to get it done. So he's sort of leading it from a top-down approach, and no doubt we've hired some. Definitely not. I don't think we've done prompt engineers because I agree that that's a sort of very yeah. Yeah. There's a lot to be desired for something like a prompt engineer, but definitely when you're building, and I think this comes back down to the internal productivity versus customer-facing stuff. If you're building customer-facing services and products that include AI as part of the portfolio, then absolutely you do require people that have a good understanding and knowledge of it. Whereas if we're talking about the in-house side of things, you can be a little more relaxed and fluid to it as well.
Yeah, for sure. How are you going about attracting AI talent? Like how can startups compete with big tech who can offer crazy salaries, like working on really, really cool projects? Ben, are you seeing like startups using any creative measures to get around that?
Look, it's tough. I think if people are purely motivated by compensation packages, you can't compete. You used to be able to say, well, the things that startups are doing are, just an order of magnitude more interesting than what big tech companies are doing. But I think now, if you're trying to compete on job interest with OpenAI is probably a pretty fascinating place to work. So that argument doesn't hold as much. I think what you don't have to get into is finding, individual missions of individual companies that resonate with the people who are looking for the job, right? And so if you find the right highly skilled AI engineer who really believes in what your business is doing, you can kind of hopefully sell them on, the mission and vision and the impact they're having. And if there's someone for whom that resonates, that makes sense. Of course, always the sort of the future value of an equity package is a tool a startup has that maybe a big tech company doesn't. So I think, startups always have to kind of weave that into the narrative, but the big tech packages for the best engineers are getting so large that even that equity story is, it starts to hold less weight. If you can earn 5 times more at a big tech company than you can in a startup, then the equity portion has to be worth a lot over a few years to kind of make up the difference.
Do you think I guess the conversation around equity packages is changing among like European startup operators? Do you think there's less confidence than there was, say, like 2020, 2021, I think a lot of people probably believe that, their 0 point whatever % might actually make them a lot of money. And I feel like maybe that sentiment is shifting. What do you think, Ben?
It's funny. I mean, there's been more successes every year. There's more successful companies, but it's also there's probably been more high-profile failures, and there's been more stories of companies that raised a lot of money who thought, where everyone thought they were going to make, life-changing amounts of money on their equity that ultimately, didn't work out. I think companies have to work harder probably now to sell the value of the long-term, the long-term equity value of the company. And, I think the best founders are able to get that message across. They're able to, come with unparalleled belief in what they're doing and why that is a transformational opportunity and that they'll grow a big business out of that. But yeah, I think the more positive stories we have, the more the easier it gets again. I think because also there's been an absence of late stage liquidity overall because there's been fewer IPOs and these kind of things. That's also not helped, right? It's not that actually necessarily companies have done badly, but just the delay in kind of exit liquidity has also made the kind of real world value of kind of options lesser. I think what we are seeing, and this is kind of interesting on this topic, is I think we're seeing it becoming more common to offer employees liquidity on startups in secondary sales as part of financing rounds, small amounts. But I think to this point, if you tell people, well, this money, options are not necessarily going to make you be able to retire at 35, but every few years you're going to get a chance to get some extra money, alongside what's coming in salary from selling some options, 5-10% of your options. as we raise financing rounds and as the company's value grows. I think it's a different way of people thinking about it. It's not a kind of, binary bet on at some point in the future we might be super rich or not, but rather people start to see it as a sort of supplemental income tied to the company performance. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that can be quite helpful for having that a more tangible piece of people's compensation.
Yeah, for sure. We've got a couple of minutes left. I've got a couple of other questions I'm curious to hear answers to. Rhiannon, have you experienced has there been like any internal resistance to using AI tools? Have there been any like culture clashes or like just anything, I guess, interesting to manage around the people side of implementing these tools at Clue?
Yep. Actually, the localization example. So the person who manages our localization and who is now an enormous AI evangelist inside the company. And when he first was in a position where this was really kind of necessity for him, he was totally skeptical. He was like, this quality is not going to be as good. It's all about the feeling like this is terrible, but I understand through a bunch of things that are going on that has to happen, but not happy about it. And as he's been doing the work and as he's been experimenting with it and making better and then seen the impact, right, in terms of the fewer complaints about, because people always write and say, you've translated this word wrong. That's certainly gone down and he's been pleased about that. But then when he's really seen he's very passionate about, like, for him, and the point Ben was making about the personal connection to the missions that people, like, this is really important and it's really important with us and it's a really big motivator for folks. And so as he's been able to see over time that he's been able to get so much more in the hands of users in their own language, he's become completely transformed by it. And now he's this big evangelist. And I mean, he's brought insight and pieces of data to me that I wasn't aware of and impact for our users that I hadn't even thought about in terms of just the sheer volume of text in the product. So that was a really interesting example of kind of going through that process. Yeah,
for sure. We've got minutes left. I'm gonna weave in an audience question into this last thing. I want to know one piece of advice, I think, from all of you on how founders can build AI systems that scale as the tech scales, because like as a journalist covering the space, every few weeks something's changing, and yeah, I can imagine that's quite a tricky one to manage as someone who's actually diverting cash into resources. Omar, maybe you can kick us off.
Ooh, that's a tricky one. I think whatever you're building needs to be built with the future in notion and the idea to pivot, if I could quote Friends. And the notion that building a framework rather than sort of diving down into a particular angle or focus, so selecting a single model or selecting a single vendor when it comes to the AI side of things, because it's changing in such a rapid fashion. The prime example being ChatGPT and OpenAI releasing the image creator and how that just swept through and made fundamental changes to how things are doing. And if you dedicated yourself to one model or one approach or one target, you need to be able to pivot to other models and other sequences. Because creating an AI framework that allows you to plug into different tools and different capabilities is definitely going to help you sort of stay on top of whatever the future throws at you. So I think in the last 3 weeks, there have been 6 major model releases across all the big names out there. And so it's just constantly shifting and learning. So making sure that you stay flexible is absolutely key.
For sure. Ben, 30 seconds. What's one piece of advice you'd give?
I think I would think about it in terms of core capabilities of these models, whether it's text generation, text summarization, image generation, anything like that. Break it into those. Use those as building blocks to figure out what's going to make your product so much more compelling, like real user value. And then assume that each of those building blocks is just going to get better and better and better every few months. And so even if what's going to generate value today is sort of good enough, imagine that in 6 months' time it's going to be exceptional, and in 12 months' time it's going to be kind of unimaginably good, and kind of work through like that.
Rhiannon, last word with you.
Well, I would say out of actually what we've been discussing here today, 2 things. One, choose a really specific use case. Be really defined and narrow about where you're going to start. And then 2, give your team the room and the space to play and to experiment.
Amazing stuff. All right. just in the nick of time. That's about all we got time for. So thanks very much for everyone that came along and joined, and a massive thank you to our panelists for all of those insights. Thanks to our partner Box for their support. And if you enjoyed today's session, keep an eye out for more Sifted Talks on our website. We'll see you next time.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you, everyone.